Hey guys, I'm Barb and welcome to Creators Campfire. Tonight I'm joined by Margaret Reffell over from Canada. So Margaret, hello.
Hi, Bob. Thanks so much for having me. I know it's a bit late where you are as well.
Yeah, no, thanks so much for joining. Yeah, I was just saying I hate doing these at like night because I've got all the darkness outside and everyone that comes on from overseas is like, oh, it's so bright here. And I'm like, damn it, I need to do some daytime ones. a freelancing web developer. I hope I got that the right way around.
Yep.
And amazing. And she is going to talk to us about freelancing and kind of her journey and the things that she's learned along the way. So if anyone's interested in getting into freelancing or kind of wants to step up their freelancing game, hopefully we can pick up some tips along the way. So Margaret, do you just want to give a bit of background into yourself?
Yeah, for sure. So I've always sort of worked for myself. So I've never had a quote unquote like real 9 to 5 job. So everything I've done, I've worked for myself. I was in like the fitness and nutrition industry before this, but I moved into web development, I would say almost a decade ago now. It's got to be almost 9 years. So almost 9 years ago now, because I started working on a TV show when I was in like the fitness and wellness area. And then I did like a lot of the research. And then the host started asking, like, hey, can you make these little updates to the website? Mostly because she just didn't have the time to.
Right.
And then I was like, oh my God, I get like immediate feedback from this. Like I put something in, it happens right away, and I can see sort of the work that I've done. It gives me the immediate feedback. And I think right from then I was hooked because I didn't have the, like I know from university and all that kind of stuff, it's always like you put in a lot of work and a lot of times you don't see the results right away. But I was like, oh my God, this feedback loop is so rewarding. So this is what I'm going to do.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Also knowing that the like websites weren't going away and the future is sort of in tech. So I knew that the path was pretty stable and career-wise I would probably be okay. So I did that for myself for a long period of time. And then in 2016, I decided to scale up. So in 2016, I started taking on a team and we grew to the size of about 7 or 8 of us. I had had an office downtown and all that kind of stuff too. But I also so that was 2016, about 2.5 years later, I was like, the whole idea was to get away from the 9 to 5. And I feel like I had just rebuilt a different kind of 9 to 5 for myself with like the offices and all of that. So I decided to get rid of the office, go totally remote, and scale back down so I could work just with me. And I do have 2 part-time developers that I work for, or that work for me rather. And we work on like all-encompassing projects for companies, still totally web-based, mostly in Shopify, and really immersing ourselves into those companies, like when we take on the project. And the biggest thing was like, I really love supporting small businesses and helping small businesses make money. So I found that when we grew to a point of like 7 or 8 people, I sort of had to make that decision of like, do I grow bigger? But then I found even when I was growing to that level, it took away that personal touch that I really liked. So that's when I sort of scaled back down again. And I was like, I really want to like dig in deep with these people, get excited about their businesses. So that's where I'm at right now. And then I really like it. It's interesting because everyone always talks about like growth and scale and all of that. And sometimes you got to need to go through it to know that that's the direction you might not want to go. And I think there's ways to scale in other ways as too. So I'm starting to, so that's where I am client-wise, and then also starting to diversify things with creating more educational content, more evergreen content for courses, membership programs, hopefully going forward too. So that's where I'm at. There's been like a lot that's happened along the way client-wise. So I'm totally happy to dive into some like fun stories and stuff like that too, and lessons learned and all that stuff.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, that's actually, I'm just going to pick up on one point there. That's quite interesting that So where you said you kind of scaled and then went, oh, actually, maybe this isn't the right thing, because I think you're right. A lot of people go into it thinking, actually, I just need to get bigger, 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 bigger. And it's like this whole kind of avalanche of things. But being able to take that time back to say, hang on, well, why did I start this in the first place? This is kind of going in the opposite direction. How can people kind of maybe know if they're heading in that direction? Is it just a case of, I just need a conversation with myself? Or
Yeah, I think it's a combination of that. And then there's the other component of like, that's what society tells us what needs to happen. So there is sort of, it's so interesting because even though for my own sanity and mental health, I knew that scaling back was the right decision. But it's crazy because the biggest thing I struggled with all of that was, well, what are other people going to think? Are they going to think that I failed? Are they going to think that I'm just doing this because I can't grow? Are they going to think that, well, I tried doing it, I'm not good at it, and that's why I'm not doing it anymore? And yeah, like those are, truthfully, like those are the things that you had to really like, sorry, that I had to really sit with and be comfortable with and realize that it's like, okay, not doing it for any of these other people. And if they have questions or if they have judgments, I just have to let it go. And it's so much easier said than done, because there's definitely like, even myself, before I had experienced it myself, I know that subconsciously, if I saw someone that looked from the outside that they were growing and everything was going well and like growing and growing and growing over like very quickly over a 2-year period, I would be like, wow, they've like got everything together. Like, I can't wait to see the next stages, like, buy out like a huge building and stuff and have like an enormous company. But, and then if I saw them scale back, I would probably also be one of those people who had that judgment. But it's so interesting to experience, because if you do go through it, the interesting part is like, you don't know you're not going to like it until you're in that position. Like, I thought I would for sure love it. And it actually surprised me more than anything that I just wasn't really into it.
But at least you had that realization, right? And you could actually, because you're right, actually, it is a society thing, and it's what will people think? So for you to actually take that step and say, actually, this isn't what I want, and I'm okay with other people like thinking what they're thinking, and I'm still going to do this. That's a huge step.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and it's not easy, but definitely like having to sit down and I feel like it's almost a lot of the times with people, not necessarily strangers, thinking that, because like they don't know your story, but there's this component also of I'm sure, as you know, like entrepreneurship and sort of taking on new challenges in general. There's always, and most often, I would say, the people really close to you that a lot of times don't think you're going to be successful at it. And I'm sure a lot of people have experienced that. And that's the thing too, is I feel like that going through an experience of scaling up and scaling down and knowing that there's people who never thought I was going to quote unquote make it in the first place, it's almost becomes like vindicating to them to a certain degree. But it's so easy to get caught up in that. And you just have to do there's a lot of sort of emotional work that goes into like, that's cool, I don't care, because I ultimately want to be happy. And there's other ways to scale. It doesn't mean just because you're not scaling in like visible numbers and employees, like at an exponential level, doesn't mean you're still not scaling. Because maybe you cut back. I think the biggest thing for me is like, after I cut back, the next year after that, I was actually more profitable because I didn't have as many expenses. I didn't have the overhead of an office and salaries and all that kind of stuff too. So things are not always as they seem, definitely.
Yeah, for sure. Just before we get on, I guess, to the physical side of things, what do you think are some of the sort of mental skills, if you can call it that, the softer skills that are needed, or the mindset that's needed, I suppose, when you're going into these kind of things? Because I guess like that, you need to be prepared for those conversations along the way.
Mm-hmm. So I think there was a few different things. And like you were saying, when you're just starting out, especially when you're just starting out in freelancing, there's going to be a lot of people around you. And a lot of the times I try to frame it in that I give them the benefit of the doubt, because realistically, like, the reason people say things to you like, I don't think this is a good idea, I don't think it's going to work, you really have to take a step back and look at where they are in their life. And that's not a judgment on them. It's just saying, like, if they haven't gone down this path already, they don't know. And if they haven't gone down this path and they are telling you that it's something that you can't do, it's really just a reflection of their own limitations. And I know that can sound trite and it's been said over and over, but it becomes so self-evident over time that a lot of the people that can be the most critical are the ones that don't have, I guess the word is, guts. I guess the ones that don't have the guts to pursue it themselves. So I think more than anything, really consider the source of your criticism, but also consider it like with a lot of empathy. Because I mean, these people are also doing their best. And I think a lot of times it comes from them genuinely wanting the best for you. So they generally don't want to see you do something and then fail. So they would rather kind of just tell you that maybe you shouldn't do it at all. That being said, I would say one of the biggest things is to surround yourself with people who have sort of walked that path before, or at least a similar one. And the really interesting thing is when you start to surround yourself with those kind of people, they are the ones that no matter how crazy your idea is, they'll be like, okay, this is a little out there, but like, how can we make it work? And and it becomes like super exciting and interesting to even just talk about, like, even if it's just like, oh, well, and Baba, I don't know if you're like this as well, but it's like, I feel like every day is like coming up with a new idea for something. Yeah. But yeah, I find like if there's people who aren't used to that sort of mindset, they're always like, oh, she's all over the place and this and that. But if you talk to your friends who are like entrepreneurs, or if they're in that freelancing space, a lot of them times they're like, yeah, that's cool. Like, I love these ideas, but like, try to prioritize, like, let's do one first. Like, at least they're kind of a little bit more cheerleaders. So as far as your own, like, just going back to your question, I kind of went off on a tangent a bit, but, but going back to your question about like what mindset stuff, I think it's a lot of work. There was a long time ago that I'm like kicking myself because I'm like, why did I listen to these people? Like, they don't know, and they don't know the ideas that are going in your head, and they don't know like the processes that you've sort of mapped out to get where you want to go. I don't know how else to explain it other than to, like, you really just have to shut it out. And if you can gather the resources to at least start to take the first 2 steps, then there's something to be said also for like, it's kind of politely declining their input and saying like, well, I didn't ask. The other alternative, which I do adopt a lot, is like, which has actually worked to my detriment sometimes. I don't tell anyone what I'm up to until it's at least like almost halfway done. So.
All right.
Yeah. So like, no one really knows like what I'm up to until like, oh, I'm doing this thing, but like, this is already done and taken care of. So it does eliminate, I know it's exciting to tell friends about stuff, but if you think that the advice of other people can take you out, then it's best to kind of keep it to yourself until the wheels are in motion, for sure.
Yeah, actually, that's a really good point, because I do come up with crazy ideas sometimes, and yes, most of them are probably totally crazy, but I will get feedback that they're all crazy. You're doing like none of it makes sense. You are all over the place, and the amount of times I've heard that is like, okay, but and then it kind of does get to you. You're like, oh, maybe I am a little crazy. Maybe I do need to scale it back. So yeah, actually, I think that's a really good point, and to maybe just know. Because I guess it's a society thing, right? It's the normal 9 to 5 is what is the norm, and therefore anything outside of that is a bit dangerous ground. So be a bit careful.
Mhm.
That's a very good point. I definitely need to keep that in mind. Okay, so going back to, I guess, more practical rather than mental stuff. What are some of the things that I suppose you, looking back now, sort of 10 years ago, you really wish you'd known starting on this journey?
Yeah, there's a few. I think one of the big ones is how to recognize like who to say yes and who to say no to. So like really trusting that, like trusting your gut. And that might not even, trusting your gut might not kick in at first, because then because you kind of have to be doing it for a little bit to get to know what the red flags are after a while. So definitely trusting your gut as far as taking on clients and saying no, because you are in a position to be able to say no. And that's important to keep in mind too. A lot of people, especially when they're first starting, kind of think that they have to take everything on, and you don't have to. There's definitely enough work out there for sure. So you don't feel like you have to take everything on. So that's probably one piece of advice I would give myself. The other one is to definitely prepare for taxes, do some research. It's still so mind-boggling that it's something that we don't, I know in North America, we don't learn about like taxes or anything in school. Do you guys?
No, and it really, really makes me mad. So someone with a financial background, I'm like, how can you send people into the work? Like, they get to 18 and you send them off to uni and you're like, here, go and get into thousands and thousands of pounds of debt that we're not even going to tell you about. We're not going to teach you how to budget. We're not going to tell you what the world is like. But, you know, you've learned some maths along the way. So bye. And it just makes me so mad.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. So crazy.
Unreal.
So definitely reading about educating yourself on like taxes and personal finance. The other one would be to, if I can suggest, coming from, it's hard to say like if you're starting to freelance to like obviously switch directions, but it's hugely advantageous to coming from some sort of customer service job as well. So I know I've never actually had like a 9-to-5 job, but I have worked in like all through university and everything. I worked at restaurants, and I think the customer service aspect has been totally like invaluable. So I think that's been the biggest thing. So if you have the ability to work in customer service, if you're still in university or even if you're in high school, I know when I was in high school, I worked in like retail and at a coffee shop and stuff too. But yeah, being able to deal with and manage other people's emotions and not take them on. I think that's a big thing that just working in customer services has taught me for sure.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I'm going to take them in turn there. So the first one, so I had some questions as you were going. The first one about saying no. So obviously that's something that I think most people struggle with because of how it's going to be on the other person. It's just not, I suppose it's not a natural thing. You don't want to upset anyone, or you don't want to be the bad guy. So naturally our instinct is just to say yes and deal with it, especially the British. I assume the Americans are probably not that much different, but we definitely will just be like, oh no, sorry, it's our fault. But so how would you go about saying no, or what are some of the techniques that you could maybe use, or for someone who's not used to it at all, where do they kind of start?
Yeah, that's a great question, because saying no can be hard, and sometimes it doesn't come out very eloquently, and sometimes you're like stumbling over your words, and but you just have to get the practice in. So there's a few different ways to say no, and definitely a few different ways to not say no, which I've also experienced. So I would say if there's a project you don't want to take on, I've used this before and it came back to bite me a couple of times. I think the worst thing you can probably say is tell them that like you just don't have time in your timeline right now. Because I have had that happen where it was somebody I definitely did not want to work with. And they were a referral from another client. And I was like, oh, well, just tell them I'm booked up like until the end of the year. I think it was like around this time a few years ago. And I was like, oh, I'll tell them I'm booked up for like 4 months and then they won't bother me. So she wrote back, she's like, okay, I'll wait. And I'm like, oh, so because once you've given them one reason, I mean, you like, there's been no exchange of money or anything. At that point, I really could have said like, look, realistically, it's not a good fit, but I didn't. And I was like, oh, okay, I guess I have to take them on now. So I did that, and it was not a good match. And the project got completed, but it was the client required, like, I made the mistake of giving her my phone number, which I typically don't do with clients, but during a launch, sometimes I do, just so they can have easy access if something goes wrong. Right. But it was like every day, phone calls and phone calls. So, and the times I have said no and I've stuck with it, the person has gone on. I've never heard from them again, which is good. So the way I try to frame it, because I know saying no can be really difficult, is like, if you're not invested in the project and you're not interested in the project, or you're not interested in the client, like working with the client, you're doing them a disservice if you say yes. So if you say yes to a project you're not invested in, it's not only are you not invested in it, but it's also not fair to the client. So trying to frame it in a sense of, you're saying no because if you're not interested in it, you're doing what's best for the client so they can find someone who's a better fit. So I have said to clients before, the most effective way that they just can't really argue with is saying, like, I just don't think this is a good fit. Because if it comes down to time or money, they can always come back to you and say that they can give you more time or money. And sometimes projects are just not worth either one of those. Yeah. So definitely saying something simple. And you don't need, I think the worst thing you can do also is get caught up in like a really long explanation of why, like continuing and going on and on. But it's tough. I mean, it's almost like you or letting a client go who you're already working with. Like, it's almost like a breakup. So it's just a matter of like a very simple email saying, like, I don't think this is a good fit. And even better, if you do know someone, you can say, like, I don't think this is a good fit, but I have this colleague such and such, and they've had experience in this before, and they might have a better time. Or if you don't have any colleagues, or you kind of get a bad vibe and you don't really want to pass them on to someone you trust, you can always tell them that there's like external services depending on what they need done. So there's external design services, there's like Upwork and stuff like that, where they can sort of publicly post their job. And then it's up to people to seek them out if they want to work with them. But yeah, it's tough, but definitely if you can adopt the thought process of like, you're not doing them or yourself any favors if you take someone on that's not a good match, because ultimately you want to be happy, but you also want them to find who the best person they can work with is, for sure.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because I suppose we tend to see it from our side and just be like, oh, I don't want to do it. No. But actually, you're right. You're not going to give them your all or your best work. So it's not good for either of you. So yeah, you're doing them a favor as well. And yeah, you could still give them other kind of resources to go to. So actually, it's not like, no, haha, you suck. It's like, okay, hang on, this isn't going to work, but maybe you could try X, Y, and Z.
Mm-hmm. And I find a lot of the time it's like they take that and they're like, okay, and then they kind of move on, and then that's the end of it. But if there has been times if they've come back and either they get really upset, or they're like, but this person referred me, and all, like, the good thing is I feel like the answer is good both ways. Either they go away, they find who they need, the job gets done, and no problems, or they come back and they're like, well, no, because this person referred me, I need this, and like they come back with like all of these requirements why you should work with them. That is a huge red flag, and it just means that you made the right decision. So if they do, so it's like a win either way of their response. Really.
That's a very good point. I would be like, oh no, what is going on?
Yeah.
Okay. You did bring up another point, actually, just when you said that. How, if you are already working with somebody and you realize along the way that it's not going to work, and therefore you need to have that difficult conversation, how do you approach that? Because that in my mind is infinitely more difficult, because you're not cutting it off at the source. You're kind of already working with them and you've built up that relationship, and then all of a sudden you've got to go, no.
Yeah, for sure. There's definitely been some difficult circumstances for sure. So there's been ones where, and it totally depends at like what phase this sort of happens at. So there's a bunch of different phases during the project. I did have one that I was a little iffy about taking them on. And then I did, because they were sort of a higher profile name. And I was like, oh, it'll be good for a portfolio and all that stuff. But once we started working together, it was very clear that I couldn't fulfill like the requirements that she wanted, because the requirements not only were out of scope that kept increasing, but they were also out of the capabilities, and also out of what made sense for the website. It was things like on the homepage, after everything had been established, she wanted to now make the homepage, when somebody first came to the website, like that Star Wars scrolling text.
Right.
I was like, but why? That's terrible accessibility. It's wrong. It's bad for a lot of reasons. She's like, no, I just really like it. And I couldn't separate, like there wasn't that sort of like usability logic. So there was a lot of things like that we just didn't see eye to eye on from a functionality standpoint as well. And I have changed almost my requirements that I tell clients up front, because I do tell them, I'm like, look, I've been doing this for a long time. I know what works and I know what doesn't. If I advise you that something doesn't work, like I highly encourage you to take my feedback, because you're hiring me not only as a developer, but you're also hiring me as an expert and as a consultant. So now I try to frame that up front, so it's like blended into the role. So when they come in, they know that ultimately it's their project and they make the final decisions, but they do know that any decisions that I make or suggestions that I make are in the best interest of they're in the best interest of like the success of the project. So in that case, it was fairly early on. But one day I just had to say, I was like, I think it was the scrolling text that was like the deal breaker when that came up. And I was like, no, I can't move forward with this. I can't move forward with these kind of demands this early on, because it's only going to escalate from here. Yeah. So my deposit is usually non-refundable, but if it's early enough along in the process and I don't think it's a good fit, I do give them the deposit back in good faith. So I wrote to her, I was like, look, I don't think it's a great fit. We're not on the same page as like what's going to best benefit the user and all that stuff. I can give you some referrals into people that could maybe match your scope, but I'm refunding your deposit. So I refunded her deposit. So I try to leave things that they can't come back and come like after me. Do you know what I mean? So I try to really leave with like a clean slate, so that they leave still somewhat happy. Like if she got a full refund, she can't be upset with the experience. So that was that case. And she actually took it well. She's like, okay, I appreciate like how you handled this and I wish you all the best. And that was kind of it. And I was like, okay, that's the best case scenario. I have had like some other, I don't know like how far to stories you want me to get, but I have had some other
it could be fun. Please go ahead.
I've had some other crazy things happen, like and these are far enough behind me, and obviously I won't say the names of clients and stuff like that, but there's that it's not what I'm working with right now. So and most of them are at least 2 years in the past. So there was one, if they're close enough to the end of the project, we kind of ride the rest of the project out. So there was one that we were very close to the end of the project, and there was a lot of points in it that were sort of unenjoyable, but I was like, we're pretty deep into the project. And so that's a kind of a judgment call that you have to make, like how far into the project are you willing to go before you cut ties with them. In this case, we were pretty far in. We were at least like 2/3 the way through of the project, coming up to launch within about a month or so. And the client emailed. So there was a few people on the emails, like there was the designer, myself, the client's assistant, and the client. And you know, we send out an email. Basically, I just start typing people's names into the to area to hook everyone into the same thread.
Yeah.
She lost her mind because her name wasn't first in the, like, when I went to go put it in.
Yeah.
Canceled our upcoming meetings, and had like a breakdown about it. Obviously it wasn't about the email. Like, there was obviously something else going on. It's never about the email. But I was like, what's that? And then she disappeared for about a month after that. Just like a very volatile situation. Ultimately, we ended up launching, but it definitely was one of those experiences where I was like, oh, it's I should, if it was earlier in the process, we could have sort of figured something out. But there does come, and this is like comes on a case by case basis. I feel like there does come a point in the project where it's like either you lose money, like you'll lose final payment or whatever, hand over the files and just like break away, and that's it. Or you make things amicable enough to complete the project. I've generally done the latter. If we're up to like halfway through the project, I've never canceled it if we're that far in. And then over time, I've gotten better with recognizing upfront if it's not a good fit or not as well too.
I guess that's experience, right? That just comes, that's the more you do it, the more you're going to pick up the red flags or the signs, or, you know, understand who you're going to work well with and who you're not going to work well with.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's some definite red flags that are sort of, there's like some subjective red flags that I personally like and don't like to work with. But I would also say that there's some like objective red flags that you should definitely avoid too. I'm trying to think of some of the top ones, but if someone, so in my opinion, prices shouldn't be negotiable. So if you send out a proposal and someone says, like, asks you to lower the price, my suggestion is, if you want to lower the price, you can, but also remove features at the same time. So say like, okay, we can do it for this much less, but we can't include this, we can't include this, and we can't include this.
Sure.
And then that at least makes things still keeps things a proportional value for you, but allows the client to pay less money and potentially move these things into another phase. So, but if a client requests that all the features are kept in, but the price gets reduced, I would drop them immediately, because in my experience, they will keep asking. They'll keep asking for more and more and more. Like, they'll continue to push the limits of what they can get for a lower price. So that is like a definite red flag for sure. If they're fighting about the price up front.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of some other red flags. Constant reassurance seems to be like a red flag. I don't know if that makes sense. But
okay.
Like if they, I don't know. A lot of the times there are clients who are like, I don't know, should I do this? Like, should I go this business route? Should I do this? Should we do this with the site? Which is great. Like, always ask those questions.
Yeah.
But there is a point where, like, this is ultimately their business and they need a vision for that. Because if you advise them too deep into their business and all of a sudden their online course doesn't sell, or they're like, then they kind of come back to you. They're like, well, you built it. And I'm like, yeah, but this is your business. So just being very clear about what your role is, and staying away from, I try to stay with people who are very clear on their plan and very clear on the end result, and stay away from clients that need constant reassurance. The other thing I found with clients needing constant reassurance is they never want to launch. It's like a very strange phenomenon, which I never thought it would happen. And it's something I never actually heard of before I started freelancing. It was very strange when it first started happening. Now now I kind of call them out on it, because what happens is like, we'll get so close to launch, and I know close to launch, there is always like all these like little edits. So there's always little things like, oh, the text here is a little bit too big on mobile. And there's always these little things, but
Sure.
then it comes to a point where they're like, no, let's change. Like, we've reviewed everything. Everything's been tested. They're good to go. And then it's always right before we're about to launch. They're like, no, I think this color should be different. Hold off. Let's wait till next week. I had a client tell me that we couldn't launch during when Mercury was in retrograde. I can't. So we had to wait another 2 weeks to launch. And then, and after a while, I was like, what is this very strange, like, psychological thing that happens right before launch? And I think it's because, like, fear, like, they have their own fear of it not working, or fear of putting it out there. And I think consciously they don't even realize it. And then that gets projected onto you. So clients, I find that happens, that the ones that need constant reassurance, there can be this weird thing around launch time where you're like, no, we have to launch. Like, we need to launch now.
Yeah, that was the whole point.
Yeah. This is what we've been doing for the last 8 months, but this is where we're at. We got to go forward. But a lot of people get cold feet. It's so crazy. I'm like, you spent so much time and money on this. Like, don't you want to get it out there? But I don't know. I think there's, like, for some reason, clients, there's a comfort in the process because it's something they have control over. But as soon as this gets released sort of into the world, they're sort of kind of relinquishing control to a certain degree. And then, I had a client asked to push the launch a few weeks because Mercury was going into retrograde. I was like, no, sorry, I can't work my entire technological schedule around that, because I would never be. I can go on vacation every time Mercury goes into retrograde because I can't work. Yeah.
Amazing excuse. Of all the things you could have picked in the world, that's what they went with.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's literally saying, I'm just too scared, or I don't want to do it. I changed my mind.
Yeah, big time. Such a weird phenomenon. So if you notice that happening, I would definitely, you can call them out and be like, look, putting your stuff out there is super scary, but we have, like, this is why we did this. And a lot of times right before launch, you have to give them a pep talk, which I had never anticipated before.
Yeah. Do you find you just like become their right-hand man kind of thing? As in, like, everything that comes up, it has to pass through you?
Yeah. So that brings up, like, something really interesting too, is like, what happens when you're so immersed in this person with, like, daily interaction and constant, like, throwing ideas back and forth, and you usually have to dig pretty deep into their business and ultimately their life as well too, if they're like a small business owner. So a lot of times it comes up as like, what's the transition after that? Like, what's the transition after launch? Do you just kind of like throw them out the nest and then that's it? So that's been interesting to kind of have to figure out over the years as well too, because I love creating these things, but I don't love doing sort of the maintenance that comes afterwards. So I think that's why it's important to, again, like, surround yourself with people who have complementary skills. So a lot of the times, a couple of things will happen. They can either come on, if it's a bigger site, they can come on with me as a retainer client after that to do, like, constant updates and maintenance. The idea is for them to be like, the sites are built so that they can generally do these things themselves. But some people they have the money and they would prefer just to keep someone on, which is fine. The alternative is I highly, highly recommend during the process that they hire an assistant close to the end. And then I'm usually happy to train that assistant for an hour or two, and then provide them with, like, training documentation at the end as well, so that person can take on sort of the updates and everything going forward. But it's definitely like a mini sort of separation at the end. We usually have like a call. There's like congratulations emails going back and forth. And then, yeah, it is an interesting, like on the relationship level, it's a weird dynamic for sure. You're kind of just like pop in, you go like really deep into their life, and then you kind of get out of there. So.
Yeah, because you must work with them for like a long, long time. Because I guess some freelancers only, depending on obviously what you do, you could only be in there for like hours or days, but you work with these people for months and months, right?
Yeah, because usually they're bigger projects. So we're usually in there for a few months. And then if they go on retainer after that, sometimes like there's been clients where it's been a few years. So there's definitely, and I guess, yeah, that circles back kind of to your other question too. Like there's parts during the process that if you have to get rid of a client, then you can do. But then like what happens if you're in a long-term relationship with them ultimately?
Basically.
Yeah, you have to break up with them, which is like, it's never fun. It's like always a little bit awkward. But the awkward thing about it is like, can you break up with them and like also find them a new partner at the same time? So there's that kind of a weird dynamic.
Right.
Yeah. So, but just know it's not, because you were hired to do the job. So ultimately it's not your responsibility to have to bring in someone else. I would say if it's a client you care about and like it's nice courtesy to say like, hey, I'm leaving because I'm either not working with this technology anymore, or I'm not doing retainers anymore, or I'm not, and these are all valid reasons, or I've like pivoted my business. So any of these reasons, and they could all be true, you could tell to your client, but you can always say to them like, but if you're willing to bring someone on as a replacement, I can spend the next month or so sort of working alongside them and train them. By no way are you obligated to do that, because being a contract worker, you don't have to give notice. Right. So definitely don't feel obligated to do it. I think with the very least, I would leave clients with like a full scope of documentation to use everything with, which is usually built when launch is done anyways. But not only for the clients, like if there is separation after a long period of time, not only is it beneficial for the clients to have this sort of person come in and seamlessly take over, but I think it's more for me than anything else, because I don't want to get a million emails after I've already left of like, wait, how do I do this? Where do I find documents for that? Like, so I would much rather spend the time being like, okay, let's bring someone else on. They can get familiar. And then once I'm gone, I'm gone. So.
It's a clean breakup.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. But I definitely like honesty is the best policy. And you can always tell them about like a nice version of the truth. Because if you grow to a point where you just don't like them, I mean, don't say that, but you can say like, it's not supporting, there's no growth in this role. I'm looking to expand, I'm looking to change directions. I'm looking to totally pivot my business. There's so many things that you can say that are totally reasonable as well.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. So I guess in terms of one of the other things that you just mentioned is like pricing. So if you're maybe starting out, or actually you're already starting, how do you approach pricing? So perhaps if you're new, and also maybe if you want to kind of step up those two approaches, I guess obviously it's going to be dependent on what you're freelancing in, but what are kind of the things that you need to consider?
Mm-hmm. So there are a few different ways to go about it. There's an hourly rate that you can go about it. Probably not the best suggestion. There's pros and cons to all of them. Hourly rate is not the best suggestion, especially for long term. It's difficult to get out of. Like it's difficult if you've been working with a client for a while to get out of working hourly for them and kind of make a changeover. So it's hard if you start in hourly to make that change over to sort of break out of hourly. Again, if you're just starting off and that's the best way for you to like mentally manage your finances, then for the first little while, I did hourly. I don't anymore. And it can be a transition for sure. And it can take some explanations to sort of get clients out of that mindset if you're keeping the same clients, but also moving out of hourly. But hourly is out there. Like, it's one way to do it. Another way is to, like, not necessarily based on hours, but set amount of time. So say like retainers, a lot of time will work that way. It's like, oh, well, your retainer is like $1,000 a month up to a certain amount of hours, and you can't carry over until you can't carry them over until the next month. So that's, I mean, it's sort of hourly. You're not committing to just trading dollars for hours, but at least you're reserving them the time, and you give them peace of mind for a standard rate. They know it's not going to go above that rate. So they know you're kind of there, and you have, like, you're able to support them. So that's kind of the benefits of, and it's recurring revenue for you, which is good. So there's the benefits of like retainer. And then there's like the one-time project fees, which is how I typically charge. So a project is like scoped out top to bottom. You come up with a price, and then you charge them some installments or the whole amount of that price, installments over time, or the whole amount of that price as well. So those are like generally the different frameworks. There's variations of that too. So you can charge like by week. So if there's a project that you're pretty confident to take like 4 weeks, and they have like a 4-week deadline, you can say to them like, okay, we can do all this within the next 4 weeks, but it's going to be like $1,000 a week, or however long to get to that timeline. So it depends on the client's goals as well too. As far as like how much, this is probably the biggest question that I ever get. How much do I charge people?
Yeah.
That's the question. That's the question that I can't give an answer to, because I don't know who you're charging, but we will try to get there, because I know it's frustrating also when people don't give an answer. It's always frustrating when there's this like mealy mouth way of talking around it and not actually addressing the actual question.
The answer is always it depends, is what I've come to the conclusion.
Yeah, the answer is always it depends, but we'll try to go through like some things to think about definitely when you're pricing. So when you're pricing, the questions kind of to ask yourself is it just you, or do you have a staff or anything like that you have to support? Let's, for this case, say that it's just you. If we are talking with freelancers. So it's just you. Okay, no problem. So we need to cover all your expenses. So there's a few different ways of doing this. You can price projects by like your income. You can ultimately, I think the answer ends up being so vague is because you can charge whatever you want to whoever you want. Whether they're going to pay it is a different question, but so that's why things become vague when you ask this question. But what you can do is you can say like, I want to make next year in freelancing, I want to make $80,000 a year. And then we're going to divide that up. And then we're going to divide that up. It's like, how much do I need to make per month? And then we divide that up, and then how much we make per month. And then you have to ask yourself, why? Why $80,000 a year? Okay, because we're used to hearing things like, oh, $80,000 a year salary. But then we also have to take into other considerations too, because not only are you going to be taxed on that, and it's also going to depend too, like what you're being taxed on, like where you live and how your business is set up. So are you set up as a sole proprietor? Are you set up as a corporation? Because those are taxed at different levels as well too. Also consider that when you work at a job, say you make $80,000 a year, you have everything given to you. So not only do you have 2 weeks of vacation, I'm talking in like standard generic terms, but let's say you have 2 to 3 weeks vacation. You go into your job, there's a chair that you didn't pay for. There's a computer that you didn't pay for. There's a building maintenance that you didn't pay for. There's all this stuff that now you have to pay for when you're self-employed. So is $80,000 not only going to match a salary, but is it going to take care of all of those kind of expenses and software as well? So if there's like, totally depending on what you're doing, but you're going to need like some sort of like basic bookkeeping software and invoicing software, stuff like that. So the question then becomes is like, is the amount of money that you want to make, does that cover all of your expenses? And does it cover your lifestyle? So someone who lives in like downtown London might charge a lot more than someone who lives out in like Timmins, Ontario, because the cost of living is also different there too. So there's there are so many factors that go into that. But if we carry across this analogy, this like $80,000 a year analogy, so we have expenses, we have tax. We don't really know what tax is coming out of that because we don't really know how it's set up. If you're set up as in Canada, like a sole proprietor, you're taxed the same as basically what a salary would be taxed. So you're taxed at that. Like corporations, it's a little bit less and stuff too. But if you're taxed at that, and then you have expenses that come out of it too. But also keep in mind that you're running a business. The goal is for you to grow. It's not to just survive one year after the other. So not only from this, let's say $80,000, are you paying yourself, but every business needs to be profitable. And what profit is like after all of your expenses, what's left at the end of the day. And if you want to walk away with an $80,000 salary, then you need to aim for 100,000 in sales. We're even without all the taxes and stuff like that, because we need to bank some profit for the business to be able to grow. You can take that, you can invest it back into the business. But I find a lot of people, especially when it comes to hourly, forget about profit. They're like, I'll work for $50 an hour. Seems high. Of course, it doesn't account for like all the like task things that you have to do, but it also a lot of the times doesn't account for profit. So money over and above the money that you're just keeping to pay your bills and live your daily life, like you're growing a business. So you want to incorporate and make sure that there's profit on top of that. So maybe that 80,000 then goes up to 100,000. Then we have to go through, well, let's divide that by 12 and let's go through like how many projects can I manage in this period of time? And sort of like reverse engineer your year. So that's definitely one way to do it, to be like, how do I get to pricing? How do I know what I'm supposed to charge? And I think when you find that when you start to reverse engineer those things, you should be charging more than you are. So I think that it typically does come down to that. But and I think that's why, like, these are all the reasons why a lot of times people say, well, it depends. And well, it's kind of vague, because that is true. Because on top of, even when you go down to like granularly, if you divide it into months and then you divide it into weeks, your weeks are not like 40 to 50 hours of coding websites. Like there's taxes in there. There's client onboarding in there. There's education in there as well too. Like you not only want to serve clients, but you want to keep taking courses, especially if you're in a field in like technology where things are constantly changing, to be able to take courses and to be able to up level your knowledge so that you can keep that cycle going, which means that you can support and empower your clients more with this knowledge that you've brought in, and so that you can up level your skills to be able to charge much more money, to educate yourself more, to charge more money, to educate yourself. Like, so it does keep going in this cycle too. And then there's also this sort of unspoken value on experience as well. So it's not just the courses that you've taken, but it's what have you experienced, like anecdotally, like that's also worth something as well. So there's so many different factors that go into it. But I would say starting off with like an annual goal, starting to reverse engineer things down, and it's not going to be perfect, because you're going to think like, oh, I took on this project. It's more money, it's more time than I realized. I didn't charge enough for it. There's so many of those that you won't know until after the fact, but all you can do is keep like learning from this project, increasing your price, learning from this project, increasing price. Sometimes it's like that project was way too easy and I was able to charge a lot of money for it. That is not the standard, I would say. It's usually the opposite. It's usually like, oh, this grew to a point where it was a lot bigger than I realized and I didn't charge enough money. So I would always say that's a good way of like reverse engineering stuff. And then once you do reverse engineer it down to that level, and you can say like, okay, I want 8 projects a year. If they're like kind of longer term projects, I want 8 projects a year. Say you want to go for like an $80,000 salary or $80,000 like income. So that means there have to be like $10,000 each. And then I would say if that's the number that you come down to, and I'm just using numbers as examples, but if that's the number you come down to, add another like 20 to 30% onto that when you're scoping out projects. Because then, of course, taxes and profits and all of that kind of stuff as well, too, that we always forget about. That's probably the closest I can get to suggesting pricing, because it's so hard, because it's so project dependent, it's so location dependent, lifestyle dependent, dependent on like clients and your ability to work and what kind of time you need off and all that kind of stuff as well, too.
Yeah, that was actually a really interesting way of looking at it, because I'd never, ever thought of it like that. And now you've said it, it makes total sense to go backwards. But I'd be thinking, like, my initial thought was, oh, what do other people charge?
Right. Yeah.
Just what they're doing, or, you know, start low and keep going. But actually, that makes way more sense because you know what you're aiming for that way, and you build up.
Yeah, for sure. And you can go on places like Glassdoor and some other sites and see what the standard salaries are for like in your industry. Because I mean, we can give sample numbers and stuff, but you can go on and find some like actual numbers of your industry in sites like Glassdoor. Also, I know we're just kind of spitting out numbers, but you do have to, I would say, within your first 1 to 2 years, like, be realistic. Of course, we would love to put goals of like, in my first year of freelancing, I would love to make $500,000. Like, yeah, of course. But there's like, I do think that without sort of knowing the ropes, it's going to be harder to get there. So of course we want to aim high. That's why I say, like, look for something in like the higher end of your range. Be willing to stretch yourself education wise, add 20 to 30% to every quote once you've come up with the number. And I think that's a good place to start to stretch your limits. After you've been doing it 2 years or so, then you're like, you know what, I've done this and I've made these goals of like 100 to 120,000. My next goal is 200, like my next big goal. And to start making those big like stepping stones, and then really like hunker down to see like, how can I get there? Who's making this kind of money? Like, what are they doing? Do I need to like diversify into like more streams? Can I make some like passive income products? Can I do like paid appearances or whatever it is? So yeah, getting creative with like getting to that number, but also having some numbers in mind for sure.
Yeah. And actually that education piece is also very interesting and very valid. Because again, not something that I would have thought of naturally, but you're right, you need to keep on top of it, right? That's you investing back into the business. So let's not forget that.
Yeah, totally.
Oh, you're so wise. Oh man, I have like a million more questions, but I've just seen the time and I'm like, how is an hour? Because I have like 20,000 other questions. Okay, I'm not going to do that. Oh man,
we can always do like a part 2. I'm always happy to.
Okay, cool. Because I'm like, I'm not done. I have more questions. Yeah, okay. They're not going to be short questions. So I'm not we might need a part 2.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh man, this is amazing. Okay, cool. Just to round off this one, do you want to let people know where they can find you and all this wonderful wisdom?
Yeah, totally. You can hear me pontificate. No, I'm just kidding. You can hear me. My tweets are not nearly as succinct as interviews. So, but you can follow me on Twitter. It's Margaret Reffell, MarGreffell. Same on Twitter. Same on Instagram. I'm also on TikTok. I mostly just watch. I don't really create, but I'm trying to be more obvious on there. For a tip to you guys, I've watched a few, this is like kind of a tangent, but I've watched a few TikTok business accounts, and honestly, the growth has been exponential. The ones that I follow, like just business tips and freelancing tips and web development tips, like growing into the followers of hundreds of thousands. So if you guys are not on TikTok promoting yourself as a small business, then it's really a pretty good untapped resource, I would say. I should take my own advice as well.
Yeah. Well, it's easier to give it out.
Yeah, it's true.
so much easier. Yeah, no, TikTok is not one I ventured into. Purely because when I did download it, I think I lost about a week of my life.
Oh yeah.
And I don't know how, because they're all like 5 seconds.
Yeah, totally.
But it's a black hole, that is. It's
dangerous.
Yeah, for sure. You also have a YouTube channel.
Oh yes, I also have a YouTube channel. You can find me if you just put Margaret Reffell into the YouTube search, and I will come up. It's business and freelancing, as well as Shopify. So I do a lot of Shopify tutorials in there as well too.
Awesome. And guys, I will link everything up in the descriptions by tomorrow, hopefully, so you don't have to remember everything. But yeah, you can just click away. So Margaret, thank you so much for jumping on. This has been wonderful.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for having me.
No, my pleasure. And guys, I'll be back same time, same place next week. So thank you again, and bye.
Thanks.